All right, Alexander, let's talk about the results of the Russian parliamentary elections, which concluded 3 days of voting. They are concluding as we get more results in, and it looks like right now, as of today, Monday, that United Russia is set to hold a supermajority. Barely, but it looks like they're going to hold that supermajority. It looks like the Communist Party gained ground. On Friday, it was looking like the Communist Party was doing really, really well, and United Russia, though it was going to keep a majority, was going to lose that supermajority. And you may want to explain the differences there. But today, after the weekend, it looks like United Russia has gained some more steam. Just for our viewers, United Russia is not Putin's party, but it is the party that Putin is affiliated to. He is not a member of the party. I guess you could say their most well-known member is Medvedev, Dmitry Medvedev. He's probably the most well-known member, an actual party member of United Russia. So, Alexander, we got the results. United Russia looks like they're going to hold that supermajority. We also had today, on the same day, we had that shooting in Perm at the university. You may want to say a couple of words about that. A terrible event. As of right now, it's 8 people that have lost their life to this shooter. The shooter came out with a statement, said he's on social media, said he's not political, he's not affiliated with anything. He just says he has a lot of hate and he wants to see death. That was his post in a nutshell. I'm paraphrasing it. A very terrible event. Just really quick, Russia doesn't have that many shooting events like this, but every now and then it does happen in Russia. It's very difficult to get a firearm, but but you can get a hunting rifle, and that's what it looks like this guy got. Anyway, he's been apprehended. And Alexander, let's get into this. The only reason I mentioned the Perm story is because it's on the same day as the elections. So, Alexander.
Absolutely. It's a very upsetting story. I should say, by the way, I've actually been to Perm, and I've been to the university where this happened. My wife was doing a seminar. It wasn't a seminar. She was participating in a conference of English literature academics from around the world, which happened to be invited to Perm. And I came along, so I actually was at this university. So it's rather shocking to know the place where a thing like this happens. But, it is a terrible tragedy. It's a terrible thing. I mean, people in the United States are familiar with this. We're familiar with events like this in Britain. They happened in Norway about a decade ago with, Breivik, the person who carried out these killings there. They're not as common in Russia as they are in the US, but these events do happen in Russia, and this isn't the first one. And I should say that Russia has had a history of a great deal of criminal and gun violence. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the murder rate in Russia, the violent murder rate in Russia, at that time was higher than Colombia's, which tells you something about how violent the country had become in the 1990s. It is not at all like that today. I mean, today law enforcement in Russia is on a completely different level, and they've been able to bring down crime rates to an extraordinary degree, especially violent crime rates. But there is still some very violent and angry people around, as there are in every society. And I'm afraid one has acted to deadly effect in Perm today. So I'm very upset and very sorry for the people I met there and for the city and for the town. But as I said, we mustn't, I think, draw too many conclusions from this, because it's the sort of thing that I'm afraid that happens in too many places around the world. But it's, not unusual in Russia and not unusual in other places too. Anyway, let's turn to the election, which of course is the big story in Russia. And I mean, I think the first thing to say is that this election confirms yet again a point that I've been making many times and other people have made many times, which is that this is a politically extremely stable country. Now, the communists, who are the main opposition party, have seen their vote rise, though I suspect by less than they might have hoped, but they're polling around 20%, which is, for them, a good percentage of the vote. The reason that they did better this time, they were previously at 13% in the previous election, is that, of course, in Russia, they have higher inflation, higher prices. There's been the problems with the pandemic. When Russians worry about domestic problems, about, wages, prices, those sort of things, those who are upset with the government tend to vote communist. When, on the contrary, it is international issues, when it's things like, the West pressing against Russia, then they tend to go for the harder line, more nationalist party, the Liberal Democratic Party. So at the moment, the Russian people are not so worried about international things. They've instead voted for the Communist Party. But I don't think we should read too much into this, because the big underlying story is that United Russia, which is a party with no very clear-cut ideology, but which represents and is seen by most Russians as the party which supports President Putin, it has managed to win around 50% of the votes. It's the overwhelming dominant political force in Russia today. It is very much a part of the Russian political architecture. And I am well aware that there will be many people in the West who say that this vote has been rigged or manipulated or changed in that way. Having visited and been to Russia many times, I could say that definitely, that in my opinion, that is emphatically not the case. Most Russians support Putin, and most Russians, because they support Putin, support United Russia. And that is the political reality that many people don't always want to face. Can I just say one very small thing? The reason why it appeared briefly that the polling outcomes were going to be United Russia getting around 45% instead of 50% is that, of course, the polling comes in later from rural areas. It's more difficult to do exit polls there. Polling from those places is later. And of course, as it comes through, those places are more conservative and they tend to support Putin. And that inevitably means that United Russia's results will be higher than the initial exit polls and polling samples would suggest. In the cities, people are more opposition-minded. In the countryside, they're more conservative.
Yeah, and in Russia, they vote with an ID. You have to present an ID and a passport, and paper ballots. How about that?
Well,
How
indeed.
about that?
Well, indeed.
Alexandra, this was definitely a vote that focused more on domestic issues, no doubt about it. And if you ask me, my opinion, even though you can't claim definitely United Russia did lose a little bit of steam. They did lose a little bit of support. The fact that they will be able to come out with this and still retain a super majority is actually a very big win for United Russia and for Putin, because Putin really spent a lot of his political capital these last 4 years with a lot of controversial decisions inside of Russia. Once again, domestic decisions around pension reform, around the economy, and of course you have the coup. So the fact that United Russia may have lost a little bit of steam, but still comes out with a supermajority means that that spent political capital of Putin's was well spent, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. You remember when we discussed the pension reform several years ago, and I said that it would turn out this way, because the point about Putin is that he does do things which sometimes are not always very popular, but which are always carefully explained and which are done for some kind of a purpose which will ultimately strengthen the economy. And the fact that he's able to make these decisions conveys to the population of Russia that he is very much in charge and in control. It demonstrates to them that he is strong. So even if in the short term they're unhappy, in the long term they are very pleased that Russia has a strong ruler and an effective leader, somebody who possesses what the Russians call the power of decision. So I think that these difficult decisions that he did actually worked in his favour in the long term. I mean, inevitably, I think there's no doubt at all that there was going to be a dip in support for United Russia in this election, simply because there are some people who are still bitter about the pension reform. There's pressure on people's incomes because of the higher inflation this year, which is, of course, universal around the world. There is some resentments about the way in which the pandemic has been handled. That's also universal. But ultimately, they still see in their president somebody who is able to make difficult decisions, which they trust are ultimately intended to be for the good of the country. And this is, by the way, a very sophisticated electorate in Russia. Again, something people don't in the West, I think, fully understand, but this is a highly educated society. Russians know exactly why they're voting and what they're voting for. At the end of the day, they see Putin, they say that is the leader we want to have. They see the other leaders that exist around Russia, the various people in the Communist Party, the Liberal Democrats. They say, well, we might find them amusing, we might want to vote for them occasionally as a protest vote, but ultimately we don't feel that they're any substitute for Putin himself. And with Putin comes United Russia, and that's why we vote for United Russia in parliamentary elections. It's a very stable political system. I think in some ways it's too stable, in the sense that because Putin is so dominant, politically speaking, in Russia, it's very difficult for other leaders to come forward and establish themselves and become, develop their own personalities, become, conceivable, viable alternatives to Putin. And I'm afraid it also means that not only will Putin leave when he chooses to, but we can be fairly sure that whoever does replace him is not going to come through the party system. He's going to come through the process of selection within the Kremlin, which is, of course, how Putin himself emerged.
Yeah, I think that's the big concern that everyone has around the world, is what happens to Russia when Putin does decide to step down, because he is so dominant. And I agree, the opposition really doesn't field anybody impressive.
No.
And inside United Russia, and maybe even inside, you could say, maybe even inside Putin's own administration, there doesn't seem to be a clear name that is going to succeed him. So, I mean, the worry there is what happens when Putin does decide to step down, which he will inevitably step down, even though now is not the best time to leave his post, given all the uncertainties around the world. What do you think of that, Alexander? That is a big concern.
That is the huge
There is
concern.
no opposition. There is no opposition, and there's no one really inside the administration.
No. There is no opposition. I mean, you look at the leaders of the various parties. I mean, can I just say, I mean, the only party in Russia, which is, apart from United Russia, a real party, which has real activists and which does have, by all accounts, some pretty, energetic and vital people at the grassroots, is the Communist Party. But the leadership of the Communist Party are an old bunch of ossified Soviet-era diehards. I mean, the party itself may have some people lower down, but the people who lead it are extremely unimpressive. Zhirinovsky, who leads the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, he's been around for ages. People just can't imagine him president at any time. I'm sure he doesn't imagine himself president either. So there's no real sign that the party system is going to throw up anybody, and nor is United Russia itself. I mean, there's nobody in United Russia who has emerged, along the way up from United Russia, and who anybody in Russia could conceive of as a leader. Now, what sort of people work inside the Kremlin, and whether any of them is going to suddenly emerge and, become the new leader and lead the country the same kind of way that Putin did, well, that we don't know. But that's the problem. And that, I think, is a real problem in Russia. There is going to be, sooner or later, a transition. And it's going to be a difficult thing to arrange, because we're going to go from a leader who is overwhelmingly dominant and extremely widely supported to somebody who is completely unknown and completely untested. And if you know Russia well, you know that the country really needs strong leaders in order to be able to work effectively. A weak leader in a country like Russia is a recipe for many problems.
Yeah. How about Navalny?
Well,
Alexander, let's talk about Navalny. And he was up to a lot of shenanigans in the elections. Real quick, there were a lot of claims by the Russian government, by the Kremlin, that the U.S. was meddling in the in the elections. Credible claims too, by the way. There was a lot of video of Navalny supporters also trying to, for lack of a better word, trying to frame things so that it looked like United Russia was rigging the votes. So they were also up to a lot of stuff, and it was caught on video that a lot of Navalny supporters were trying to make it look like United Russia was rigging the elections. Really strange stuff going on from Navalny's side. We talked about his app that got pulled from the app stores, which is also, looking to to rig the elections as well. I mean, this guy he's what a character. By the way, a lot of people in and around Navalny, you may want to comment on this, also kind of dropped him. His legal team, his medical team, some NGOs around him, they kind of jumped ship.
Exactly. I mean, this is it. I mean, the whole Navalny operation, if I can put it like this, is within Russia itself is disintegrating, and is disintegrating in a great deal of acrimony. I mean, there was this group of medical doctors who briefly, a doctors' union, as it called itself, which briefly allied itself with Navalny. They've now issued an extremely angry and bitter statement, saying that he basically used them as long as they were useful to him, and then when they stopped being useful to him, he simply dropped them, and they've been running into all kinds of difficulties since then, and they've had no support from him or from his organisation whatsoever. I'm going to give my own opinion about Navalny. I think Navalny himself has very little support in Russia, never did have. He's I think he's an obsessive attention seeker, and I think that plays a very big role in what he does. I don't think most Russians like him. I think for a certain brief period, about 10 years ago, he did attract a certain amount of attention, because at that time he presented himself as an anti-corruption blogger rather than a politician, and this did attract a certain amount of notice. But when he began to become involved in politics, I think a lot of the attraction to him went away, and I think a lot of people thought that he was using the issue of corruption basically to promote himself. So I don't think he has a great deal of support. I think the organisation that formed itself around him is a slightly bigger organisation than Navalny himself. And I think some of these ideas of all these apps and all that probably came from other people around his organisation. And I think, again, it was ultimately a very cynical and manipulative affair, because they could see that the communists were going to gain support. So they were using all these apps and things to basically tell people to vote communist, because that's the best way, supposedly, of hurting Putin. And of course, what they were really doing was that they were basically parasitically attaching themselves to the communist vote, in the expectation that if the communist vote did increase, they would be able to gain credit for it. Well, in the end, the communist vote didn't increase by as much as they might have expected. And it's just possible that one of the reasons for that is that some people who might have voted communist were put off from voting for the communists, because they knew that Navalny was, or rather his organization was telling them to vote for the communists. So it could very well be that, as I said, Navalny's operation actually had the opposite effect to the one that it did. Can I just finish about Navalny by saying that I think most of all of this, most of what it does now, the Navalny team, and indeed Navalny himself, is not about Russia at all. It is about retaining the support of the West, because with that support comes money, comes invitations to Western institutions, to Western universities, to all that sort of thing. And in order to keep that flow of money and support from the West going, they have to come up with stunts every so often. And this latest stunt in the election was just that.
Yeah. Watching Navalny's like watching the MTV show Jackass. Yeah. People don't know what I'm referencing. It is stunts. You said it perfectly. It's just all about creating these types of stunts to get attention. Yeah. That's exactly what it's about. Stability in Russia, Putin. Contrast that with what's going on in the United States. No stability, and Biden. And then a final word as you close out the video, Alexander. Who is going to succeed Putin? Because that is always the $1 million question.
Well, it's always the $1 million question. Now, I mean, I don't know. Let's deal with the second first. I mean, I don't know who's going to succeed Putin.
A couple names, draw some names. I mean, because it'll be good. Because I want our commenters, I want our viewers to also throw some names in the comments down below. I want to read what our viewers think.
Yes, if we're talking about people of in the public eye, the person who has been notably seen alongside Putin an awful lot recently, who's been going with Putin on holiday, who is a charismatic and popular figure in Russia himself on his own count, and who conceivably would be a popular and strong leader of Russia, is the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. He's been a very popular leader for a very long time. The only thing, in my opinion, that really works against him, and why I personally, is his age. I think he's about the same age as Putin. So, you'd be replacing one, man who's becoming older in years with another man who's equally becoming older in years. So for that reason, I don't think it's going to be Shoigu. But I know there's a lot of people in Russia who still think it. I think it's unlikely. Now, the other name that gets talked about is the Prime Minister, Mishustin. Now, he comes across to me as an extremely able, very capable technocrat, the most efficient prime minister figure that Russia has had for a long time. And I mean, he seems to be busy overhauling the economy. He's very, very clever, very tech-minded. He's created the most efficient digitalized tax system in the world. And he's also apparently been responsible for creating one of the most efficient electronic banking systems, retail banking systems in the world. But he is, at the same time as he's a very efficient technocrat, he doesn't really come across to me as much of a politician. And I can't really imagine him as the overall person in charge. The other person that Putin, some people talk about as a possible successor, is the governor of a region called Tula. It's a man called Duran, who is a former military, but he is the governor of a city called Tula, which is near Moscow. Tula is an important place for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's a major center of Russia's military-industrial complex. The artillery, the guns of Russia's artillery and all that, they get made there. It's also a culturally important place. It's the place where Tolstoy came from and where his great estate was. And it's also got a very important university and educational institutions. And it's near enough to Moscow to give Duran some kind of connections to Moscow. Now, whether in fact Duran is indeed somebody who's been marked out for important things, I have no idea. But I did notice that on the eve of the election, Putin had a meeting with Duran, and who knows, maybe he is being marked out for higher things in the future. But this is pure guesswork. So I'm just throwing out a few names. I mean, I don't know, but certainly your other point, a president in full control of his government, in full control of his country, with a clear set of policies, an efficient and loyal team around him, made up of extremely capable people, Mishustin, Shoigu, Lavrov, you name it. I mean, some really, really capable people there, all working together in unison to the same end. And that's the situation in Moscow. And you contrast that with the situation in Washington. And I mean, it makes one, well, the contrast is frankly painful, is all I can say. And, Russia's...
Two opposite ends, really.
It's
two opposite ends.
I mean, it's absolutely, it's completely, it's shatteringly different. And, well, is it surprising that things in the world are going the way they are? I mean, I've just done a big program about, a recent summit meeting, and I mentioned how the Saudis now seem to be quietly distancing themselves from the US, and we're getting more and more information about this, and they're attaching themselves increasingly to the Russians. And it's not surprising. They contrast the leadership in the one capital with the leadership in the other, and they say, well, we know who we think we can rely on in a crisis.
Yeah, I wonder how many years Putin has. He's 68 now.
Yeah, he's 68.
How many years do you think he has to govern, would you say?
My own guess, and I'm going to say this, I think he's going to see out his current term, which ends in, I think, 2025. He might decide to stand for another, but then I think he will go. I think that at the probably perhaps 5 years, perhaps a little more. I think we are coming to the end of this. And I think definitely there are discussions, but we never know, because I mean, my impression was that at one point the plan very much was that he was leave at the end of this term, but I think that changed suddenly because there was worries that if he left, the international situation was so difficult that they couldn't afford to have a weak leader in place. So who knows?
No, there was no way he could have left any sooner, given everything that's happened specifically in the United States.
Exactly.
Well, 68, he would be 78, say, when he does decide, if and when he did decide to retire and to leave the political scene. Look, 78 is, that's how old Sleepy Joe is. That's how old Trump will be if Trump does decide to run in 2024, if.
Yes.
So... it's definitely a good possibility that Putin will stay on for another 10 years.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I would point out, he's healthy, he's fit, he's full of energy, his mind is as clear as always. So, I mean, we're not talking about a person who is, in any kind of physical debility. So, from that point of view, I mean, there's no pressure on him to go.
Yeah. I will also say this: we did a lot of shows on Russia, like say maybe 3 years ago, and at that time period, he did look like he was getting tired. Yeah. But something happened, and I don't know what happened within those 3 years. I agree with you. He got a lot more energy now, and he seems a lot more purposeful in everything he's doing. But there was a time, like 3-4 years ago, where he was looking kind of like, I think I've had enough of this.
Yes, that was absolutely my impression. I mean, he looked very jaded at one point, and he didn't seem for a time to be himself. And then suddenly, the old Putin came back, and he's been with us ever since. And who knows? But I mean, he's clearly got lots he wants to do. I mean, he's got very ambitious economic plans and social plans and all sorts of things. And of course, he's got the whole Eurasia project that he's working on. So, I mean, he's probably going to be around for a while anyway. And certainly there is no pressure from the population for him to go. On the contrary, they want him to stay. I think that's the clearest possible message you can take from from these elections.
Yeah. All right, we'll leave it there. Guys, go to the Duran.locals.com. Please join us there. It is free to join. You can get all of our content and a lot more from the community there at the Duran.locals.com. Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, and Super U are the new media platforms, so you can get all our videos there as well. You'll find all these links underneath this video. And Alexander, 10% off at the Duran shop. You can use the code REALNEWS.
With our magic mugs and our hats, our t-shirts, our sweatshirts, amazing things. You can find them all there on our shop, and you support us by buying them. So what's holding you back? Come and buy them and support the Duran and be the owner of these great things.
You'll find the link underneath this video. Take care.